Well, since coming back from our European trip where we had the breakdown, which I managed to get the camper going again and continue our journey, thankfully, we've had an intermittent idle issue, and I want to try and solve that problem now before another trip. I suspect it's wiring related again. With these T4s, the wiring can be a problem, especially on the right-hand drive models because of the routing that the engine loom takes. But I suspect that one of the wires going to the fuel pump has been disturbed or damaged, with me having to remove the fried starter motor and fit a new one, and then of course remove the seized air conditioning pump compressor. During that whole process of getting the van going again, one of the wires, I suspect, going from the ECU to the 10-pin plug down at the bottom of the engine on the front near the sump, has been damaged or disturbed enough for it to cause this intermittent idle issue. So when it's got revs, it's fine, but it's when it's idling, it either stalls or just switches off. And the fault in VCDS relates to the quantity adjuster. Now, I've had the fuel pump replaced before because the quantity adjuster failed, and I believe that the quantity adjuster failed because the wiring was faulty and just messed it up completely. Now I want to avoid that again, because replacing the pump and the quantity adjuster cost me just under $1,000, and I don't want to spend that money again. So I suspect that because it's intermittent, it's a wire. So I'm going to spend some time trying to solve that, and I'll show you what I find. D4s, eh? Gotta love them. I think it's fair to say that something's going on down here, because I have a lot of oil all over the place, and there is oil on these wires that come down to the 10-pin plug, which is this one over here. So I suspect what's happening here is that oil is getting into these connectors and causing the intermittent issue. Because even now, while I moved the van to get it up on these ramps to take the bumper off, it stalled and then took a while before it restarted. So I'm going to have a look at this oil thing, this oil situation. I do not have an oil pressure error, but this is not right. There is oil coming from somewhere. So let me show you what I think I'm dealing with here. I think I'm dealing with a little bit of an oil leak over here on the sump, because that seems to be wet the whole way around there. And if you look at how wet it is underneath here, and there is definitely a coolant leak from the lower temp sensor. If I wiggle this lower temp sensor, it is completely loose and coolant is coming out of it. So that is not good. There also appears to be a little bit of oil coming from the new vacuum pump, so that is not properly sealed. And if I look further up, I can definitely see oil up there. So I decided to remove the front end of the van to give me the best kind of access to the front of the engine. And that is the front end of the van off now. So I've got the radiator off, the slam bar, the front grille, the front bumper, and I've now exposed the front of the engine. I think it's fair to say that the oil filler is leaking again, because there is oil inside those recesses on the outside of the holes, which means that there is still oil getting out of there. And these are the correct O-rings. So you can see the residue there. So oil is coming from here as well. Again, it seems to be every couple of years I need to replace these O-rings, because that is where it leaks on the top of the engine over there. And you can see this is wet in there and in here. So that's one place it's leaking oil. This down here I think is all about coolant. These injector hoses are new. I'm pretty confident that that's not leaking. What I'll do is I'll clean up all of this mess. I'll replace this injector hose anyway, so it's dry. But I suspect that what's happening here is that the combination of this leaking, the coolant leaking, is what's causing this mess. Now I do have a little bit of a glisten over on this side of the engine, over here. So I suspect the rocker cover gasket is in need of replacement as well. I then removed the two temperature sensors from the side of the block, extracted the wet leak back hose, and started to remove the conduit from various wires within the engine bay. They were all pretty much filled with either coolant or oil. Then I proceeded to remove the contacts on the back of the alternator, which had also got pretty dirty and oily. As I progressed through the front of the engine, just removing connectors, I was trying to clean up as much of the oily residue as I could from all of the wires that are on the front of the engine bay. Because pretty much everything down there, including all of the connectors, were absolutely soaked in oil. With most of the connectors undone on the front of the engine block, I undid the two bolts that hold on the thermostat, and then extracted the big coolant pipes from the front of the engine block as well, which of course soaked the plugs even more. So it's fair to say that I have my work cut out for me over the coming weeks and months as I try and solve all of these leaks and electrical issues that have appeared in my campervan since my breakdown in France. So stick around, subscribe to the channel, and watch me fix everything that I can on this engine. So perhaps I can show you around a little bit. This is a 2.5 TDI ACV AJT engine block. So the ACV has a factory intercooler and a different map and different injectors. Essentially that's the difference. And the AJT has the standard iron injectors, which are notoriously bad. I've replaced mine with Bosch .216 injectors. I've also fitted an aftermarket intercooler because you cannot get the 102 ACV intercoolers new anymore, and the ones that you can get are 20 plus years old. So I have an intercooler from an L200 Mitsubishi, which is the same sort of size, and it works fantastically well. I have had a new fuel pump fitted because my quantity adjuster failed. My timing has been set by a pro. The engine has been mapped to accommodate those uprated injectors by TH Performance. So this is the electronic fuel pump that feeds obviously the injectors, and it is controlled by the ECU. And this here is the vacuum pump, which I recently replaced. Now I've got a remote oil can catch tank on mine, and I drain this every now and again. The bottom just screws off, so I don't get any extra oil going into the intercooler, which means that I can check on whether or not the turbo is leaking oil. On this side here we have the coolant reservoir. Now believe it or not, I have actually replaced this a couple of years ago now, but within about a month or two of having replaced mine for a nice new one after my first coolant change, this was dark again. So I suspect that my radiator and my engine block, although I flushed them, still has a lot of nastiness inside of it, which is turning the fluid a nasty brown color, which is what I was seeing leaking out of this temp sensor over here. And I'm also replacing my air conditioning pump, which failed. That is when I discovered, after removing the engine tray, that actually I had both a coolant leak and an oil leak from somewhere. So I am going to try and remedy all of that. I mean, look at this. This is a set of wires that goes up to the MAF sensor, and they're absolutely covered in an oily residue. This whole wiring loom is absolutely covered in oil. Try and figure out where the heck all this stuff's coming from. Man, I've got my work cut out for me in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to crack on, sort out all of those leaks, check all the wiring, and replace as many oil seals as I can. And I think I'm going to try and do the water pump at the same time. And the best way to do things is just get everything off. So subscribe to the channel and follow as I try and reseal and refresh this complete engine. I'm going to replace every seal that I can get my hands on and sort out the electrical issues, hopefully once and for all. Anyway, I hope you found this video informative. Give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you a thing, and of course it's a great encouragement to me. So let's fix this.